Iran. The first major difference is that Iran is active, whereas the US is passive. Okay? Another thing is go back to the bully example where the bully has to maintain credibility. He has to show that he's more powerful than the other kids, right? So if you provoke him, he has no choice in the matter but to hit you, okay? But you, the new kid, can choose whether or not to provoke him or not. You can choose the timing of when to provoke him. Therefore, you are active, okay? The second big difference is that Iran has a clear strategy. It knows what it wants to accomplish, and it knows how to accomplish what it wants. Remember, what Iran wants is control the Strait of Hormuz and the United States out of the Middle East. That's what it wants to do. And it's calibrating its attacks in a certain way to achieve this end goal. And it's working out very well for Iran, okay? The United States, on the other hand, doesn't know what it wants. It wants to destroy Iran. But what does that mean, okay? Destroy. And it could mean regime change. It could mean economy collapses. It could mean the civilian population starves, okay? It can mean anything. But because there's so much ambiguity, so much confusion about what it means, it confuses military strategy, all right? And the last thing is, of course, is that Iran is flexible and the United States is inflexible. Okay? So by studying the escalation ladder, we discover that Iran has far more advantages than the United States. Okay? All right. So what does this mean? All right. It means that Iran will probably win this war ultimately. But there has to be major changes to its society in order to win this war. All right? So remember, to win a fight, you have to have three things: focus, clarity, and resolve. Alright? You have to know what your purpose is, you have to know how to achieve it, and you have to be determined to achieve it, okay? So what does this mean for the Middle East? What does it mean for Iran? Well, first thing is focus means unity. Meaning that you have to unite your population, which means basically crushing all dissent. We can't argue anymore. We have to unify for a purpose, okay? The second thing, clarity, is to censor people. Censorship. And we're already seeing that in Israel, where you're not allowed to film military strikes. Okay? If a drone comes and attacks Tel Aviv in Israel, you cannot film that and put on social media. Okay? The government will come and arrest you. Same thing in Dubai. You cannot show Dubai being attacked. Okay? So massive censorship going on. And resolve just means militarization, where the Middle East moves towards total war. Total war just means that every citizen now is recruited into the war effort. It just means that the entire economy is geared towards war. Okay? And one last point I'll make is this. What we need to understand about the escalation ladder is that as it moves up, we have to remember that this war is being fought multidimensionally. Okay? What does that mean? It means that the military is just one dimension, but there are four major dimensions. There are others, but let's focus on four major dimensions, okay? The first major dimension is narrative. Narrative is basically world opinion. Second is political. Political just means the relationship of nations to each other. The relationship of the government to the people, okay? Political. The third dimension is economic. And the fourth is military. And what's really important to understand is that the military dimension is probably the least important. There are other dimensions that are much more important. Therefore, these four factors determine how the United States and Iran move up the escalation ladder. Okay? Because your purpose is to control the narrative and justify why you're doing what you're doing. Political means you still have to maintain good relations with other states, right? So, as the United States is fighting this war against Iran, the United States is still talking to China. The United States is still talking to Russia, okay? So that discussion, that political discussion, determines the contours of this fight. Economic means that as this fight is still happening, nations are still trading with each other. And that factors into how the military is fought. Okay? Does that make sense? So I know this is very complicated, but you need to understand how complicated war is. It's not as simple as saying, you know what, let's nuke that guy. It doesn't work that way. Okay? There are a lot of constraints. There's a lot of factors, a lot of stakeholders involved to constrain the use of nukes. Okay? All right. So let's now discuss ground troops. All right. The first question we look at is, will ground troops be used? And the answer, unfortunately, is yes, they have to be used. And it has to do with how the military works, okay? Of how wars are fought. Basically, when you fight a war, you have to have a correct cost pyramid, okay? And the most simple cost pyramid, okay, is this. Infantry, soldiers, okay? All right? They're at the bottom. Why? Because they're the cheapest. What's above them? Armor, okay, artillery, tanks. They're more expensive to produce. You need more resources, you need more time. Then you have naval, right? Then you have air. Okay, does that make sense? This is the cost pyramid. And cost pyramid is this question of like, how much energy, how much time, how much resources do you need to produce a certain product, okay? It costs you very little to produce a soldier, but it costs you a lot to produce an airplane. And this is important because wars are usually wars of attrition, meaning that you have to put all your resources into win the war, okay? So this is just production capacity. And this is the most standard model that you have of a cost pyramid for a military war, okay? Does it make sense, guys? The problem is that the United States have an inverse pyramid, okay? Meaning that air is what's dominant, then naval, then armor, then soldiers. You can't fight a war like this. I mean, the moment you choose to fight a war like this, you've lost the war. Because you either take out the country in like 2 days, or you're screwed over. Because you cannot replenish your forces. Now, I know this is hard to understand, but 1991, the Persian Gulf War, 2003, the Iraq War, these are not real wars, okay? Because the Americans were so dominant and Iraq was so weak that it was basically a video game, all right? It was just these pilots flying around, just bombing everything, okay? It's like guys in tanks just running over the Iraqi army. Those were just video games. But this Iran thing is a real war. And therefore, you cannot fight a war like this. If you want to win this war, the only thing you can do is return to a realistic cost pyramid. You don't have a choice in the matter, right? Because again, your cheapest product are soldiers, right? And your most expensive are airplanes. You cannot afford to lose an airplane in order to save a life of a soldier. Eventually, this cost-benefit analysis will blow up on you, okay? Does that make sense, guys? All right, so if the United States wants to win this war, then it has no choice but to use ground troops, to use soldiers as the main force of its military. Any questions so far? All right, okay. Now the question then is, will the United States use ground troops? I already said that if the United States is to win this war, it has no choice but to use ground troops. But will the United States use ground troops? And a lot is determined by the game theory strategies of the different players, okay? So let's look at the 4 major players in this war. You have US, you have Israel, you have Saudi Arabia, and you have Iran. Okay? All right? So, the United States and Iran, they're pretty easy to understand. What the United States wants to do is destroy Iran. Okay? Why? Because if we were to destroy Iran, the United States would have complete control over Middle East oil. And it would control global trade through the Strait of Hormuz. And therefore, the United States can maintain its empire, okay? So a really simple objective. Let's destroy Iran. We don't care how, we don't care why, let's just go do it, okay? Iran has another strategy, which is control Strait of Hormuz and destroy CENTCOM. CENTCOM is basically the American military in the Middle East, called Central Command, okay? So those are two major military objectives of Iran. And we can understand why. Because if CENTCOM is destroyed, Iran has complete control over the Middle East. Now, Dubai, now Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait have to pay taxes to Iran. Now Iran, the new kid, is now the bully of the Middle East, right? Now it's a hegemon. That is the political objective of this war. Okay? Israel is a bit more complicated. All right? For Israel, sorry. One other thing is humble Israel. That's the other thing, because even if you defeat the United States, you still have to deal with Israel, okay? And Israel is the great military power of the Middle East. So you want to humble them. You want to weaken them. You can't destroy Israel because Israel has nuclear weapons, right? You piss off Israel, those nukes start flying. You don't want that, right? So those are the three major political objectives for Iran. Control the Strait of Hormuz, destroy CENTCOM, and humble Israel, okay? If you are Israel, actually for you, the strategy is different. What you want to do is this. You want to destroy CENTCOM and destroy Iran. Okay? Those are your objectives. Why? Because if you destroy both the United States and you destroy Iran, then you are the sole hegemon in the Middle East. Okay? Also destroy the GCC. Destroy Saudi Arabia as well. Why? Because once Saudi Arabia is destroyed, all its resources belong to you, okay? And this creates something called the Greater Israel Project, which is what we will discuss next class. But as you can see, that's really important, is that even though the United States and Israel are allies, their ultimate strategy is different. Their objectives are different. In fact, they're in conflict, okay? They have Saudi Arabia. What does Saudi Arabia want to do? Well, destroy Iran, because if you destroy Iran, you have complete control of the Strait of Hormuz. Then you can be a bully, okay? But you also want to destroy the US and you want to humble Israel. Alright? Does that make sense? Alright? So by understanding how each player perceives the game, we can now understand how they will go about their strategy. Right? So the United States just wants to destroy Iran. But as you can see, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran all want to destroy the United States. And how do you do that? You do that by forcing the United States into a long ground war. Right? Therefore, if you're Israel, you don't want to use nukes. Why? Because nukes would end the war too quickly. You want to drag this war out as long as possible to force the United States to send in ground troops. And then you're like, well, why doesn't the United States use nuclear weapons? And the answer is already told you, the escalation ladder. It needs to justify itself to the people, okay? When you do anything, all right, when you do anything, you have to worry about certain factors, okay? You have to worry about troop morale. Your soldiers have to believe that they are fighting for a good cause, okay? You have to worry about public opinion. You have to make sure that the world is on your side. You have to worry about politics, political will. You have to make sure the people are unified, and you have to worry about enemy morale. You don't want to piss off your enemy so much that they go into an extreme, they jump the escalation ladder to extreme beyond your control. Okay, does that make sense? Okay? So as you can see, war is extremely complicated. It's not just about weaponry. It's not just about resources. It's ultimately about controlling the narrative, controlling the political landscape. Okay? Marshaling the resources in a proper way that is strategically beneficial. All right? Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. So, so we just answered two questions. Will the United States use ground troops? Yes, it will, because Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel will work together to force a ground invasion. Even though the United States doesn't want to do so. But unfortunately, the United States doesn't have a clear, coherent strategy. It's passive. Therefore, it can be manipulated into sending a ground invasion, okay? And the second question is, will Israel and the United States use nuclear weapons? And the answer is no, because it's not in their best interest to use nuclear weapons. Okay? Israel wants the United States to lose this war. And so that means a long war that destroys the American political will to fight any more foreign wars. If America loses, Israel becomes the dominant power in the Middle East. Okay? And so the last question is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And we'll answer that next class on Thursday. Any questions?
Will Americans take over Iran like what they did to Venezuela? Like they captured their president?
Okay. Look, the strategy in the beginning was to do a Venezuela in Iran. Meaning you go in, you kill the leader, a new leader emerges, negotiate with you, and surrender to you because you're too powerful. Okay? But Venezuela and Iran are two very different countries. The Venezuelan elite is very pro-American, meaning that their wealth, their children, their family is stored in America. Therefore, the Venezuelan elite have a vested interest in negotiating a deal with America to protect their own interests. But for 40 plus years, America has sanctioned the Iranian elite. And Iran has become poor and angry and disgruntled because of that. Therefore, they lose nothing by fighting you, okay? So even though you've killed the supreme leader, and you've killed many of their leaders in fact, the elite themselves are unified in opposing you. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, any more questions? Yep. Alan?
So, I in fact have a question about the motivation of US to involve in this war. Like as you said that US want to control all the oil, so like they must destroy Iran. But I think this is like a little bit confusing because I think US know that this war is really highly risk and it can potentially even like destroy the whole systems. So why US risk the risk of like whole system collapsing to like control the oil that Iran had?
Okay, all right. So this is the key question that everyone's arguing about. Quite honestly, we're going to argue this for the rest of eternity, okay? We're going to argue this for eternity because like no one knows. And there's never going to be a clear answer. In fact, there are multiple possibilities, okay? What I'm going to do today is offer you the most simple explanation. In the next class, I will offer you a much more complicated explanation, okay? But the simple explanation is this. Again, this goes back to military doctrine, how the United States military works, okay? And the military doctrine is prevent the heartland from arising, right? So the United States is here, this is Europe, this is Russia, this is Iran, India, China, Japan, this is Middle East, and this is Africa. All right, so the American military doctrine is this. The greatest threat to American power is the heartland unifying, okay? Why? Because if the heartland unifies, it can trade by itself through railways. But America is primarily a naval power. Therefore, it requires people to trade by sea. Okay? And so its strategy is to make sure there's never any cohesion in the heartland. Either by making sure that no great power arises in the heartland, and that's why America went to war in World War I and World War II, because there's a great fear that Germany would conquer the world, or Europe and Asia and create the heartland, okay? Therefore, America had to stop Germany from rising. So you either make sure no great power arises, or you create so much conflict that they're always fighting each other. And that used to work before, okay? Now, there's a problem. The problem is the BRICS nations. Russia, Iran, and China are coming together. And if they come together, guys, that's a major piece of the heartland. And everyone else, Europe, Middle East, Africa, India would probably follow, okay? Because it is easier to trade in the heartland than it is to trade with America, especially with the US dollar declining, right? So, in other words, the United States has no no choice but to fight this war because that's their entire strategy to maintain hegemony in the world, to prevent the heartland from unifying. All right? Does that make sense? Because like once you destroy Iran, the heartland fractures. There's no way that they can now trade together anymore. They're still reliant on American maritime routes, okay? America maintains is still the hegemon because it controls world trade. Whoever controls world trade controls the world. Whoever controls the heartland controls world trade, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, but this is just one explanation. There's actually other explanations, and I'll go into a more complicated explanation next class. All right? Any more questions? Yep.
So you mentioned Saudi Arabia and how it wants to see the downfall of both the US and Iran.
It wants to see the downfall of Israel, US, and Iran.
And, yeah, and to me that sounds like a pretty big goal. And how would they possibly use their strategy to achieve that goal? Or how would it possibly be for Saudi Arabia?
Okay. All right. So it's very confusing to people why Saudi Arabia is actually against Iran, okay? But actually, if you go back and look at their history, they have major conflicts with each other. All right, so let's go over some of their conflicts. All right, so Saudi Arabia, Iran. The first major conflict is that Iran is a theocracy and Saudi Arabia is a monarchy. A theocracy just means that you're ruled by clerics who represent God. The monarchy is a king who represents God. And for the Iranians, that is blasphemy, that's heresy, that's against the religion, okay? So Saudi Arabia and Iran hate each other. Saudi Arabia sees Iran as a threat and trying to induce a revolution within Saudi Arabia. Iran sees Saudi Arabia as blasphemous, okay? And it's a huge issue because Saudi Arabia is the home of Mecca and Medina, the two holiest sites in the Islamic world, okay? Second issue is that Saudi Arabia is Sunni and and Iran is Shia. So these are two different sects of the same religion, but it's like Protestants and Catholics. They just hate each other, okay? Okay, and the last thing is that Iran is anti-US and Saudi Arabia is pro-US. What this means is that Saudi Arabia has military bases, American military bases, inside of the Holy Land. And for the Iranians, that is the worst crime, right? Because it's infidels who are protecting the Holy Land. Infidels are not allowed in the Holy Land, right? If you're not a Muslim, you're not allowed to go to Mecca, all right? All right, so Saudi Arabia and Iran hate each other. Saudi Arabia has a huge problem in that it is an oil economy. Most of its GDP comes from oil exports. And for the longest time, it was trying to build a knowledge economy. It was trying to build tourism. It was trying to promote games, okay? Does not work. So if you're Saudi Arabia and you see the future, it's a pretty dismal future because eventually your oil is going to run out. Eventually people are going to switch to electrical vehicles, digitalization, which means that oil is no longer so important, okay? So what you need to do is, if you're able to control the Middle East, right? So where you get your money now is from trade access, the Strait of Hormuz. That's a viable future. If you just sit back and wait, eventually your nation's going to run out of oil and therefore it's going to cease to exist. Okay, so Saudi Arabia needs to act now. And the way that it wants to act is it wants to create a conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran where they destroy each other. Once they destroy each other, Saudi Arabia can come up on top. Now, Israel cannot be destroyed because Israel has nuclear weapons. But the goal is to negotiate a peace with Israel after the war is over. Right? Does that make sense? To split the Middle East between Israel and Saudi Arabia. But will Israel agree to this deal? Probably not. But according to game theory, Saudi Arabia has no choice in this matter because it is so far behind everyone else. Okay? It can only hope that this chaos leads to new possibilities. Because given the structure of the game so far, it does not have a very good future. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, any more questions, guys? All right, okay, great questions. So please continue to follow the war, okay? So you have to follow the war and understand what's going on. And in this class, what I'm doing is I'm providing you the game theory analysis for you to understand what's happening and why it's happening and where this war is going, okay? Again, the 3 big predictions I make, and we'll know in the next year or two if these three things happen or not, is the United States will send in ground troops. It has no choice in the matter if it wants to win this war or continue this war. There will be no nuclear weapons being used. Again, I will apologize to the world if nuclear weapons are used, okay? The third is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque will be destroyed at some point. And it's something I will talk about next class.